Chapter 1. The breakup that wasn't. David Reynolds knew something was coming before she said a word. It wasn't intuition, not exactly. It was pattern recognition. The same way he noticed when a spreadsheet had one number out of place, or when someone paused half a second too long before answering a simple question. People revealed things if you paid attention. Most didn't. David did. So when Melissa asked, "Do you have a minute?" in that particular tone, the one that sounded rehearsed but aimed for casual, he already knew the direction of the conversation. He muted the television, set the remote down neatly on the coffee table, and nodded. Sure. She didn't sit right away. That was also part of the pattern. People who had something difficult to say often delayed the moment just long enough to convince themselves they were being thoughtful. Finally, she lowered herself onto the couch beside him, though not too close. Another detail. "I've been thinking a lot lately," she began. "That usually means a speech," David said calmly. She blinked, caught somewhere between annoyance and relief. "I'm trying to be serious." "I know. Go ahead." She pressed her lips together briefly, then continued. "I really like you. You're steady. You're kind. You've been good to me." David nodded once. "Thank you. But," she added, the word landing exactly where it was expected, "I don't think we're right long-term." David didn't react immediately. He wasn't shocked. He wasn't even disappointed in the way people assumed he should be. He had seen it unfolding for months, the gradual restlessness, the way silence became uncomfortable for her instead of easy. Silence didn't bother him. It never had. For Melissa, it seemed to echo. "I think," she went on, choosing her words carefully, "we'd be better as friends." There it was. David allowed himself a small smile. Not sarcastic, not bitter, just acknowledging. "Sure," he said simply. "Why not?" Melissa exhaled visibly, shoulders dropping as if she had been holding tension for days. "Really? Yeah." He leaned back slightly, resting one arm along the top of the couch. "I don't see a reason to make it dramatic." "That's mature of you." "It's practical," David said. "Mature might be a bonus." She laughed, a little too quickly. The relief was real now. She had expected pushback, questions, maybe even an argument. Instead, she got agreement. It changed the balance instantly. "I was worried you'd take it hard," she admitted. "I didn't," David replied. "You told me what you wanted. That makes things simple." "That's really refreshing," she said. "A lot of guys wouldn't handle it like this." David tilted his head slightly, studying her. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course. When are you planning to move out?" The relief vanished so quickly it might as well have never existed. "What?" she said. "You said you want to be friends," David continued evenly. "That changes the living situation." Her brows pulled together. "I don't understand." "I don't live with friends," he said. "Especially not friends I used to date." She stared at him, waiting for the part where he laughed and admitted it was a joke. It didn't come. "David," she said slowly, "I'm not saying we need to rush anything. We can take time to figure things out." "I'm not rushing," he replied. "I'm giving you 30 days. 30 days. Her voice rose slightly. "I live here." "You did," he corrected gently. "As my girlfriend." Her expression hardened. "This feels extreme." "It's consistent," David said. "If we're friends, then we have a different kind of relationship. Different boundaries." She leaned forward, frustration creeping into her tone. "So you're just cutting me off?" "No," he said calmly. "I'm treating you like a friend." "That doesn't sound like friendship." "It is, from my perspective." She shook her head. "Friends help each other. They support each other. They don't live together unless that's the arrangement from the beginning," David replied. "And they cover their own expenses." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "So what? If we go out for coffee, I pay for myself?" "Yes." "That's ridiculous." "That's standard," he said. "At least for me." She stood, pacing a few steps before turning back toward him. "You're being cold." "I'm being clear," David corrected. "There's a difference. You don't even seem upset." He considered that for a moment. "I'm not upset that you told me the truth. I'd rather know where I stand. You could at least act like this matters." He met her gaze steadily. "It does matter. That's why I'm handling it this way." She opened her mouth to respond, then stopped. There was something in his tone, not harsh, not defensive, that made arguing feel ineffective. "You're really serious about this," she said finally. "I am. And there's no middle ground?" David shook his head. "Not for me." She looked at him for a long moment, as if trying to reconcile the man she thought she knew with the one sitting in front of her now. The quiet hadn't changed. But something else had, something she couldn't quite push against. "I didn't expect this," she admitted. "I know," he said. He reached for the remote again, then paused. "If you need help finding a place, I can recommend a few sites. Beyond that, I'll give you space." "That's it?" she asked. "That's it." She gave a short, humorless laugh. "You're impossible to read." David shrugged slightly. "There's not much to read. You said what you wanted. I listened. And that's just the end of it?" "For that part," he said. "Yes." Silence settled between them again, this time heavier on her side than his. After a few seconds, he gestured lightly toward the television. "Do you mind if I finish this episode?" She blinked. "Right now. It's halfway through," he said. "I'd like to see how it ends." Melissa let out a breath, something between exasperation and disbelief. "I need some air." "Okay." She grabbed her jacket and headed for the door, pausing only briefly as if expecting him to say something more. He didn't. The door closed behind her with a soft click. David sat there for a moment, listening to the quiet settle back into the apartment. Felt familiar again. Balanced. He picked up the remote and unmuted the television. As the show resumed, he allowed himself a small, private smile. Clarity was underrated. Chapter 2. Adjusting the silence. The apartment felt larger the next morning. It wasn't a dramatic change. The walls hadn't moved, and the furniture still sat exactly where it had been the night before. But space has a way of expanding when expectations leave with it. David noticed it as he stood in the kitchen, pouring coffee into a mug that no longer had a matching pair sitting beside it. He didn't rush the moment. He rarely did. The quiet wasn't uncomfortable. It settled around him the way it always had, neutral, steady, almost practical. Silence, to David, was never something that needed filling. It was simply what remained when everything unnecessary had cleared out. He took a sip of coffee, glanced at the clock, and nodded to himself. "Still on schedule," he murmured. That, more than anything, felt right. At the office, nothing had changed, and somehow everything had. David arrived at 8:57 a.m., as he always did, 3 minutes ahead of the expected start. He gave a quick nod to the receptionist, set his bag down at his desk, and powered up his computer with the same quiet efficiency he applied to most things. Within 10 minutes, the low hum of conversation filled the workspace. Keyboards clicked. Someone laughed too loudly near the coffee machine. A printer jam triggered a familiar string of mild curses from accounting. It was routine, predictable, comfortable. "Morning, Reynolds," Marcus called from across the aisle, rolling his chair back slightly. "You look suspiciously calm for a Thursday." David glanced over, one eyebrow lifting just slightly. "What's wrong with calm?" "It usually means something's about to go wrong," Marcus said. "Or already has." David considered that, then shrugged. "Then I guess I'm ahead of the curve." Marcus squinted at him. That wasn't a denial. It wasn't meant to be. "Oh, something happened," Marcus said, turning his chair fully now. "I knew it. Spill." David continued typing for a moment before answering. "Melissa and I decided to stop dating." Marcus blinked. "That's it? Decided to stop dating? That's the accurate version. And the human version?" David finally looked at him. "She wanted to be friends." Marcus winced. "Ah, that version. It's fine." "You don't look fine," Marcus said, narrowing his eyes. "You look exactly the same." "That's because I am," David replied. "That's not how breakups work. It is if you see them coming." Marcus leaned back slowly, studying him with growing interest. "Hold on. Don't tell me. You gave her the speech, didn't you?" "I didn't need a speech." "Please tell me you didn't just nod and say, 'Okay.'" "I said sure," David corrected. Marcus groaned. "Of course you did. And then I asked when she was moving out." The silence that followed stretched for a beat longer than usual. Marcus stared. "You what?" "She said she wanted to be friends," David repeated. "I adjusted accordingly." "You wait. She lives with you." "Lived," David corrected. "And you just reassigned her lease situation like it was a calendar update?" "I gave her 30 days. Marcus let out a low whistle. "That's cold." "It's consistent." "That's the same word you just used," Marcus pointed out. "It's still accurate." Marcus shook his head, somewhere between impressed and horrified. "What did she say?" "She didn't expect it." "No one ever expects you," Marcus muttered. "That's not a bad thing." "I didn't say it was bad," Marcus said, holding up his hands. Look, most people would have tried to negotiate, keep things comfortable, ease into it." "Why?" "Because breakups are messy." David tilted his head slightly. "Only if you make them that way." Marcus opened his mouth, then stopped. After a moment, he gave a short laugh. "You know what? I'm not even going to argue. I feel like I'd lose and not understand why." "That's usually how it goes," David said evenly. Marcus pointed at him. "That, right there. That's why this is weirdly impressive." "It's not meant to be impressive," David replied. "It's just practical." Practical turned out to be the word of the morning. By 10:30, it had spread to at least 3 other desks. "Is it true you scheduled your breakup?" someone asked as they passed by. "It wasn't scheduled," David said without looking up. "I heard you gave her a 30-day notice like a tenant," another voice added. "That part is accurate." "Man," the first one said, shaking his head. "You're built different." David finally glanced up, just briefly. "I don't think I am." "Trust me," Marcus called from behind him. "You are." David returned to his work, letting the conversation drift around him without needing to participate in it further. He didn't mind the attention, but he didn't chase it either. That was when she spoke. So, do you always handle things like a contract negotiation? Her voice came from his left, clear, measured, but carrying just enough amusement to keep it from sounding critical. David turned slightly in his chair. He knew who it was before he looked. Claire Bennett stood there with a file tucked under one arm, her posture relaxed but attentive, as if she had simply wandered into the conversation rather than deliberately observing it for the past 30 seconds. She was newer to the team, for months, maybe 5, but she already had a presence people noticed. Not because she was loud. She wasn't. But she asked questions in a way that required an answer. I don't think relationships are contracts, David said. Claire nodded thoughtfully. Good. That would be exhausting. But expectations still exist, he added. Ignoring them doesn't make them go away. She smiled slightly. And you think redefining them that quickly works? It keeps things clear. Clear for you, she said. Or for both people? Both, David replied. Eventually. Claire shifted her weight, considering that. Eventually sounds like there's an adjustment period. There usually is. And you're comfortable pushing someone into that? I'm not pushing, David said. I'm responding. To what she said. Yes. Claire studied him for a moment, her gaze steady but not intrusive. That's interesting, she said finally. Most people use a different word. Like what? Cold. Detached. Overly logical. She smiled again. Those crossed my mind. I assumed they would. But, she added, tilting her head slightly, I don't think that's quite right. David raised an eyebrow. No. Detached implies you're avoiding something. She paused. You don't seem like you avoid much. I avoid inefficiency, he said. That's not the same thing. It overlaps more than people think. Claire let out a quiet laugh. Okay, that was good. Thank you. A brief silence settled between them. Not awkward, just unfilled. Claire didn't rush to break it. David noticed. I should get this back to my desk, she said, lifting the file slightly. But, for what it's worth, I don't think you handled it badly. I didn't think I did. I know, she said. That's part of why it works. She turned to leave, then paused. And David. Yes. If you ever decide to soften your approach. She gave him a small, knowing look. Let me know. I'm curious what that would look like. I wouldn't recognize it myself, he said. That's exactly why I asked. And then she walked away. David watched her go for half a second longer than necessary. Then he turned back to his screen. Marcus leaned over the divider almost immediately. Okay, that was new. What was? You, Marcus said. Taking that long to answer someone. I answered. Eventually. David didn't respond. Marcus grinned. Oh, this is going to be interesting. David shook his head slightly, though there was the faintest trace of something else there now. Not quite a smile, but close enough to recognize its existence. The quiet hadn't changed, but it had shifted. Chapter 3, The Unspoken Conversation. David did not think about Claire Bennett the way Marcus clearly wanted him to. At least, that's what he told himself Thursday evening as he unlocked his apartment door and stepped into the familiar, manageable quiet. There were no scattered shoes near the entrance, no half-finished conversation lingering in the air, no competing preferences layered across the room. Everything was exactly where he had left it. He set his keys in the same ceramic dish by the door, loosened his tie, and walked into the kitchen. The refrigerator hummed softly, a steady background noise that asked nothing of him. He opened it, scanned its contents, and pulled out what he needed for dinner with the same efficiency he applied to most decisions. But efficiency didn't stop his mind from replaying moments. Specifically, one moment. If you ever decide to soften your approach, let me know. I'm curious what that would look like. David paused halfway through slicing a tomato. He wasn't entirely sure what she meant by that. Not the words themselves, those were clear, but the intention behind them. Most people who challenged him did it with an edge, a need to prove something or to push him into reacting. Claire hadn't done that. She asked questions the way someone asks to understand, not to win. That was unusual. He finished cutting the tomato, added it to the plate, and shook his head slightly. Curious, he repeated under his breath. He didn't mind curiosity. He just wasn't used to being the subject of it without some underlying agenda attached. Friday mornings tended to move slower at the office, at least in tone. People worked, but there was a subtle looseness in the air. Plans forming, energy drifting toward the weekend. David noticed patterns like that. He always had. What he didn't expect was Claire sitting at the desk adjacent to his when he arrived. That's new, he said as he set his bag down. She glanced up, already halfway through reviewing something on her laptop. Temporary relocation, she said. IT's working on my station. They needed a full day? They said a few hours, she replied, which I translated into, pack your patience. That's a reasonable adjustment. She smiled faintly. I like sitting over here, though. It's quieter. David raised an eyebrow. You work in an open office. And yet, she said, gesturing lightly around them, there are zones. That's accurate. This feels like one of the calmer zones. It usually is. Good. she said, settling back slightly. Then I picked correctly. David nodded once and opened his laptop. The conversation could have ended there. Many would have. Claire didn't seem like many. So, she said after a moment, how's the 30-day countdown going? David didn't look up immediately. It's been less than 24 hours. Still counts as day one. Then day one is uneventful. No dramatic suitcase packing? No passive-aggressive music choices? She asked. I don't think she'd choose those methods. Interesting that you already know that. I lived with her for 5 months, he said. Patterns form. Do they ever surprise you? Sometimes, David admitted. But usually not in situations like this. Claire leaned her elbow lightly on the desk, turning her chair slightly toward him. You really don't seem bothered. I'm not, he said, meeting her gaze briefly. Should I be? I don't know if should is the right word, she said. It's just uncommon. Most people attach expectations to outcomes, David replied. When the outcome changes, it feels like something was lost. And you didn't lose anything? I lost a relationship that she didn't want, he said plainly. That's not a loss I can control. Claire watched him carefully. That sounds very resolved. It is. She tapped her pen lightly against her notebook, thinking, did it ever bother you? Before she said anything. Yes. The answer came without hesitation. Claire blinked slightly, as if she hadn't expected that. For how long? She asked. A while. And you didn't say anything? I observed it, he said. I adjusted to it. That doesn't sound like communication. It's a form of it, David replied. Just not verbal. Claire tilted her head. You expected her to notice the same things you did. No, he said. I expected her to say what she wanted when she was ready. And you were okay waiting? There was nothing to chase, he said. If she needed distance, closing it wouldn't fix anything. Claire let out a quiet breath. That's a very different. So I've been told. She smiled slightly. By most people? By Marcus. Repeatedly. That checks out. A brief silence settled again, but this one felt lighter, easier. Claire broke it this time, her tone shifting just slightly. Do you ever get tired of being the one who understands things first? David paused, considering the question more seriously than the others. I don't think I understand things first, he said. You handled that situation faster than most people would, she pointed out. I handled it when it became clear. And it was clear before she said anything. Yes, so you were ahead of her, Claire said gently. In awareness, he agreed. Not in timing. Does that ever feel isolating? The question lingered a beat longer than the others. David leaned back slightly in his chair, folding his hands loosely. Not really. No, he said. Clarity isn't isolating. It just narrows options. Claire's expression softened, as if that answer gave her more than she had been looking for. That might be the most you thing you've said yet, she said. I'll take that as neutral. It wasn't negative. Then it's positive. She laughed quietly. You categorize everything. It helps. I can see that. Another pause followed, one that neither rushed to fill. It stretched comfortably, like the pause in a conversation between people who didn't feel the need to perform. Claire glanced at her screen, then back at him. Can I ask you something less analytical? You can try. She hesitated just slightly this time, not out of uncertainty, but as if she were choosing the right entry point. When you said you were giving her 30 days, did you already know you wouldn't change your mind? Yes. Not even if she asked? She did ask. And, Claire leaned in just a fraction. I didn't change it. Why not? David met her gaze fully now. Because she already made her decision. Claire held his eyes for a moment, then nodded slowly. And you don't believe in reversing those? I believe in listening the first time, he said. That answer lingered between them longer than anything else he had said. Claire sat back, her expression thoughtful but lighter now. Well, she said after a moment, that explains why you seem so calm. It wasn't sudden for me, David replied. No, she said softly. It wasn't. Another silence settled, but this one carried something new beneath it. Not tension, not awkwardness, just awareness. Claire broke it first, but more gently this time. For what it's worth, she said, tapping her pen lightly against the desk again. Most people wouldn't have handled that the way you did. That's been mentioned, David said. I don't mean the logistics, she clarified. I mean, the conviction. David considered that. Conviction comes from experience. Good or bad? Both, he said. Usually at the same time. Claire smiled slowly. That makes sense. She turned back to her laptop, but the shift felt temporary, not final. David returned to his own work. For a while, neither spoke. But the distance between them, one desk, a shared workspace, quiet air, felt subtly different now. Not smaller, just more defined. And for the first time in a long time, David found himself noticing the difference. Chapter 4: A Shift in Pattern. David didn't plan to spend Saturday morning with Claire Bennett. He planned to go grocery shopping. That was the extent of it. Structured, predictable, efficient. A list on his phone, mental estimates of time and cost, a general awareness of how crowded the store would be depending on the hour. He preferred earlier, when people moved with purpose instead of drifting through aisles like they had nowhere else to be. At 9:12 a.m., he stepped through the automatic doors of the neighborhood market, grabbed a basket, and turned down the produce aisle. At 9:13, he heard a familiar voice. "You're exactly where I expected you to be." David paused mid-step and glanced to his right. Claire stood a few feet away, holding a bundle of spinach in one hand and a faintly amused expression on her face. He raised an eyebrow. "That implies you had expectations." "I did," she said. "Early morning, organized shopping, minimal deviation." "That sounds accurate," he admitted. "What are you doing here?" "Buying food," she replied, gesturing lightly with the spinach. "Same as you, I assume." "Also accurate." She studied him for a moment, then glanced down at the basket in his hand. "Let me guess. You already know exactly what you're getting." "I made a list." "Of course you did." Claire shifted her basket to her other hand. "All right," she said. "This is interesting." "What is?" "I want to see how you shop." David gave her a look. "It's not an activity." "I think it is," she said. "For you, at least. It's a process." "Even better." He considered declining. It would have been easy. Logical. He hadn't come here to socialize. But something about the way she said it, curious, not intrusive, made it feel less like an imposition and more like a shared observation. "You can walk with me," he said finally. "I'm not changing the plan. I wouldn't expect you to." "Good." They fell into step together, moving down the aisle at a pace that was neither rushed nor leisurely. David picked up items with quiet efficiency, checking quality, comparing prices with brief glances, placing them into his basket without hesitation. Claire watched for a moment before speaking again. "You don't browse," she said. "There's nothing to browse for. There's always something to browse. Not if you already know what you need." She smiled slightly. "That mindset says a lot." "So I've been told." They turned into the next aisle. Claire picked up a random item from the shelf, a jar of something she clearly hadn't planned to buy, turned it in her hand, then put it back. "You know," she said, "most people use grocery shopping as an excuse to wander." "For what purpose?" "To not feel rushed. To explore." "I don't feel rushed," David replied. "And exploring doesn't require a grocery store." "Fair," she said. "But sometimes it's about disrupting routine." "I don't see a benefit in disrupting something that works." Claire glanced at him sideways. "You really believe that?" "Yes. Even in relationships." The question landed softly, but deliberately. David didn't answer immediately. He reached for a carton of eggs, inspected it briefly, and placed it into his basket. "Routine isn't the problem," he said after a moment. "Misalignment is." Claire slowed slightly, letting his words settle. "So if someone wants more spontaneity," she said carefully, "and you prefer structure? Then it's a difference to address early," he replied. "Not something to fix later. And if you don't address it, it resolves itself," David said. She let out a quiet laugh. "That's one way of putting it." "It's accurate." They reached the end of the aisle and turned again, moving in sync without needing to adjust. Claire tapped her fingers lightly against the handle of her basket. "Did she ever ask for more spontaneity?" "Yes. And I suggested we plan things she wanted to do." Claire stopped walking. David took 3 more steps before noticing and turning back. "That's not spontaneity," she said. "It is if the activity is different," he replied. She stared at him for a second, then shook her head, smiling. "You scheduled spontaneity. I organized it. That's not the same thing." "It achieves a similar result," he said. Claire laughed more fully this time, the sound light and unguarded. "I don't even know how to argue with that. I'm not trying to win an argument." "I know," she said. "That's what makes it worse." He tilted his head slightly. "Worse? You're calm about it," she explained. "There's no defensiveness. It makes it feel like I'm the one overcomplicating things." "You're not overcomplicating it," David said. "You're describing a preference, and your solution didn't match that preference." "No. Did you realize that at the time?" "Yes." Claire blinked. "And you didn't change it?" "I adjusted within reason," he said. "But I don't change who I am to maintain something that isn't working." She studied him for a long moment, her expression quieter now. "That's consistent," she said. "It usually is." They resumed walking, but the rhythm felt slightly different now. Less observational, more intentional. At the front of the store, David placed his basket on the conveyor belt, beginning to unload items in a methodical order. Claire stepped up beside him, placing her own smaller selection down next to his. The cashier glanced between them. "Together?" "No," David said at the same time Claire said, "Yes." They both stopped. The cashier raised an eyebrow. Claire turned to David, amusement flickering across her face. "Well, now this is awkward." "It doesn't have to be," he said. She considered that. "You're right. It doesn't." She turned back to the cashier. Separate. Got it, the cashier said, clearly entertained. They stood side by side as the items were scanned in silence for a few seconds. Then Claire spoke again, quieter this time. You default to independence, she said. Yes. Even in small things. It keeps things clear. Claire nodded slowly. And you don't think that blocks connection? David handed his card to the cashier, waited for the transaction to process, then turned slightly toward her. I think connection depends on alignment, he said. Not proximity. Claire absorbed that, her gaze steady. That's a very specific way of looking at it. It works for me. She paid for her items, then stepped aside with him as they gathered their bags. Outside, the air was cooler than expected, a light breeze cutting through the morning stillness. They walked toward the parking lot together, neither rushing to separate. Claire shifted her bag in her hand. So what's next in your very structured day? David glanced at his watch. Errands, laundry, reading. In that order? More or less, she smiled. Of course. A brief pause followed, then she spoke again. You don't adjust your plans much for other people, do you? Not on short notice. And if someone asked? I'd consider it, he said. If it made sense. Claire nodded, as if cataloging that answer. Good to know. They reached the point where their paths naturally split, her car to the left, his to the right. Claire paused, then looked at him with that same thoughtful expression she carried when something genuinely interested her. This was unexpectedly informative, she said. It was groceries, David replied. Exactly, she said. And yet, he allowed the faintest hint of a smile. I'll see you Monday, she added. Monday, he repeated. She turned and walked toward her car. But this time, David didn't look away immediately. He watched her for a moment, not analyzing, not categorizing, just noticing. Then he turned and headed to his own car. His day would continue as planned. But something, quietly and without disruption, had shifted again. Chapter 5. The Test of Consistency. David noticed the message at 6:42 p.m., just as he was closing his laptop for the day. It wasn't unexpected. That, more than anything, made him pause. Melissa. Hey, are you around tonight? Thought maybe we could grab dinner. Catch up. He read it once, then again, not because he needed clarity, but because he appreciated precision. The phrasing was careful, casual, non-committal, light enough to suggest no pressure while still implying familiarity. Catch up. As if nothing had structurally changed. David set his phone down on the desk for a moment and leaned back in his chair. Around him, the office had already begun thinning out. Chairs scraped lightly against the floor, quiet goodbyes exchanged, the soft rhythm of routine ending for the day. He didn't reply immediately, not because he was unsure but because timing mattered. Immediate responses often invited assumptions. Delayed responses created space for intention. At 6:47, he picked up his phone again and typed, David, I'm heading home. I can meet you for dinner tomorrow around 7 if that works. He read it once, confirmed its clarity, and sent it. The reply came faster than expected. Melissa, tomorrow? I was thinking tonight. David watched the message for a second, then typed again. David, tonight doesn't work for me. 3 dots appeared almost immediately. Stopped, disappeared, reappeared. Melissa, you don't seem very flexible all of a sudden. David considered that wording carefully. Then he replied, David, my schedule hasn't changed. This time, the pause lasted longer. When her next message came, it carried a slightly sharper edge. Melissa, we used to be able to do things like this without planning. David's thumb hovered over the screen for half a second before responding. David, we were in a relationship then. He didn't add anything else. He didn't need to. The silence that followed stretched long enough to feel intentional. Eventually, the conversation ended without resolution, which, to David, was a form of resolution. He put his phone away, grabbed his bag, and left the office. The next day, he arrived at the restaurant at exactly 6:58 p.m. It wasn't particularly upscale, just a clean, well-run place with consistent service and predictable quality. He chose it intentionally, neutral ground. He checked in with the host, was shown to a table, and sat down facing the entrance without thinking about it. At 7:04, Melissa walked in. She spotted him quickly and smiled, a touch too bright, as if trying to reset something that no longer existed. Hey, she said, sliding into the seat across from him. You're early. By 2 minutes, David replied. She laughed lightly. Still counts. He gave a small nod. How have you been? Good, she said, then added quickly, busy. That's usually the case. A server approached, took their drink orders, and left them with menus. Melissa didn't open hers right away. Instead, she leaned forward slightly. This feels different. It is, David said. You're really sticking with this, she said. Yes, she studied him for a moment. You're not even going to pretend it's not a little strange? I don't think pretending helps. It used to be easier between us. It was structured differently. Melissa exhaled, leaning back. You keep saying things like that. Because they're accurate. She picked up her menu, flipped it open, then closed it again without really looking. So, she said, her tone shifting slightly, you've been okay? Yes. No, I mean, she hesitated. With everything. David met her eyes. I'm fine, Melissa. That's just it, she said. You always seem fine. I am. Even now. Yes. She gave a short, incredulous laugh. Do you hear how that sounds? I do. And I don't think it's a problem. The server returned with their drinks, giving them both a brief pause. Melissa thanked him, then wrapped her hands around her glass as if grounding herself. I thought, she said slowly, this would be easier. For who? David asked. For both of us, she said. I mean, we get along. We always have. We did, David agreed. And we can still do things like this, she said, gesturing lightly around them. It doesn't have to be rigid. David took a sip of his drink before answering. What you're describing isn't friendship. It's familiarity. And that's bad. It's misleading, he said. Melissa frowned. How? Because it suggests a continuity that doesn't exist anymore. She leaned forward again, frustration building. You're overanalyzing this. I don't think I am. It's dinner, she said. Two people who know each other, having dinner. Yes, David said. And paying for themselves. She blinked. Are you serious? Yes. That's ridiculous. It's consistent. She shook her head, almost laughing again, but this time without humor. You're really committed to this, aren't you? I am. Why? She demanded. Why does it have to be so exact? David set his glass down and met her gaze evenly. Because you told me what you wanted, he said. And I listened. I didn't say I wanted this. You said you wanted to be friends, David replied. This is what that looks like for me. She stared at him for a long moment, searching for something. Flexibility, hesitation, anything she could shift. Most people don't do it like this, she said finally. I know. And that doesn't bother you? No. The server returned again, asking if they were ready to order. They placed their orders separately and the moment passed, but the tension remained. Melissa looked at him again, quieter now. You know, she said, I thought keeping things friendly would make this easier. For you, David said. Yes, she admitted. And has it? She hesitated. Not like this. He nodded once. That's because this is honest. She let out a slow breath, leaning back again. I didn't mean to make it complicated. You didn't, he said. You simplified it. That caught her off guard. By ending it? Yes. And you just accepted that. I respected it. Melissa looked down at the table for a moment, then back up at him. I don't think I realized you'd move on this quickly. David didn't respond right away. Then, calmly, I didn't move on quickly. I was already there. Her expression shifted, surprised, then faintly unsettled. You mean, before I said anything? Yes. Why didn't you tell me? Because it was your decision to make, he said. Not mine to influence. She shook her head slightly. That's not how most people handle things. I'm aware. They fell into silence again. But this time it wasn't just her discomfort. It was recognition. The meal continued with less resistance after that, conversation settling into something more neutral, less layered with expectation. By the time the check arrived, the dynamic had already shifted again. The server placed it neatly between them. Melissa looked at it, then at David. You're really not going to budge on this? She asked. No, he said. She sighed, but there was a trace of acceptance in it now. Okay. They each paid their share. Outside the restaurant, the night air was cool, carrying the faint hum of passing cars and distant conversation. Melissa adjusted her jacket and looked at him. This isn't what I expected, she said. I know, but... She hesitated. I get it. I think. That's good. She nodded slowly. Yeah. A brief pause followed. Well, she said, offering a small, genuine smile this time. I'll text you when I figure out my moving situation. Okay. And, David. Yes. You handled this better than I thought you would. He considered that for a moment. I handled it the way I needed to. She nodded. Yeah, I see that. They parted ways without anything unresolved. And for the first time since the conversation began 2 nights ago, Melissa didn't try to reach for something that wasn't there anymore. Monday morning came with its usual rhythm. When David arrived, Claire was already at her desk. She glanced up as he sat down, studying him with quiet curiosity. You look exactly the same, she said. I usually do, David replied. Dinner go well? It went as expected. Claire tilted her head slightly. Which expectation? That she wanted familiarity, he said. And that I would maintain boundaries. And you did. Yes. She watched him for a moment longer. No exceptions? She asked. None. Claire smiled, slow, deliberate, almost approving. Good, she said. David raised an eyebrow. Good. Yeah, she replied, turning back to her screen. Consistency is rare. Is that something you look for? He asked. She glanced at him again, just briefly this time. It's something I notice. David considered that. Then quietly, so do I. The conversation ended there, but the alignment lingered. Chapter 6, saying what matters. The shift didn't happen all at once. If Marcus had been watching closely, he might have tried to pinpoint it. Assign a moment, a cause, something he could label and revisit later. But David didn't experience it as a turning point. It was quieter than that. Incremental. It appeared in longer conversations, in pauses that didn't need filling, in questions that went deeper without feeling heavy. By Wednesday afternoon, it had settled into something neither of them had defined, but both recognized. Claire leaned back slightly in her chair, eyes on David with that now familiar focus that felt less like scrutiny and more like alignment. "Can I ask you something without you turning it into a system?" she said. David glanced up from his screen. "You're assuming I will. I'm preparing for the possibility." "That's fair," he said. "Ask." She turned her chair slightly toward him, one leg tucked casually beneath the other. "What do you actually want?" she asked. David didn't answer right away, not because the question was difficult, but because it deserved more than a quick response. "In general?" he asked. "In relationships." "That's specific," he said. Claire smiled faintly. "I'm trying to avoid your depends on context answer." He closed his laptop halfway, giving her his full attention. "Consistency," he said. She blinked once. "That's it. It's the foundation," he replied. "For what?" "For everything else." Claire tilted her head. "Okay, expand." David leaned back slightly, hands resting loosely on the edge of the desk. "I want someone who says what they mean," he said. "Not someone who implies, hints, or tests." "And if they don't?" she asked. "Then I don't guess. You just leave it?" "I let it stand as it is," he said. "If they want something, they can express it." Claire studied him carefully. "That assumes people always know what they want." "No," David said. "It assumes they're responsible for figuring it out." "And you're not responsible for helping them?" "I'm responsible for being clear about what I want," he replied. "Not for managing someone else's uncertainty." Claire's expression shifted, less analytical now, more thoughtful. "That's a very clean boundary," she said. "It avoids confusion. It also avoids involvement," she countered gently. David considered that. "I don't think clarity reduces involvement," he said. "I think it makes it intentional." Claire let that settle for a moment before asking, "So what else?" "Respect for time," he said. "That sounds like a scheduling preference." "It's not," David replied. "It's about priority. If someone values time, they plan. They show up. They don't expect flexibility without giving it." Claire smiled slightly. "You're very intentional about that." "Yes. And spontaneity?" she asked, an echo of their grocery store conversation. "I don't oppose it," he said. "I just don't depend on it." "So you wouldn't change your routine for someone?" "I would," David said. "If it made sense." Claire leaned forward just slightly. "Define makes sense." "If the outcome is worth the adjustment," he said. "That sounds like a cost-benefit analysis." "It is." She laughed quietly. "Of course it is." He didn't smile this time, but there was something lighter in his expression. "You're not wrong," he said. Claire tapped her fingers lightly against the desk, thinking. "Okay," she said. "Last one." "For now," he added. "For now," she agreed. "What makes something worth the adjustment?" David met her gaze fully. "Reciprocity," he said. The word landed differently than the others. Claire's expression didn't shift immediately, but her stillness did. "Expand," she said. "I don't invest where the return is uncertainty," David explained. "Not emotionally, not practically. If the effort is one-sided, it's not stable." "And how do you measure that?" she asked. "By patterns," he said. "Not moments." Claire nodded slowly. "That explains a lot," she said. "It usually does." A brief quiet settled between them again, but this one was heavier. Not uncomfortable, just more deliberate. Claire broke it first. "You realize most people don't think this way." "I'm aware. And most people wouldn't say it out loud like this." "Why not?" he asked. "Because it sounds uncompromising." David considered that for a moment. "I think it sounds clear," he said. Claire held his gaze, something shifting behind her eyes. "It does," she said softly. "That's part of the problem." "How so?" "Because once it's that clear," she said, "there's no hiding behind ambiguity. That's the point." "I know," she said, "and it's refreshing." "But?" David asked. Claire smiled faintly. "You heard the weight in that." "I did." She exhaled quietly, looking down for a second before meeting his eyes again. "It means you'd notice if something wasn't aligned," she said. "Yes. And you wouldn't ignore it." "No. And you wouldn't wait around for it to fix itself." "No," he repeated. Claire nodded once more, absorbing that fully. "Okay," she said. David studied her this time. "You're processing something," he said. "I am. Do you want to say it out loud?" She hesitated for just a fraction of a second, enough to register as thought, not uncertainty. Then she leaned back slightly. You make it very hard to exist halfway, she said. David raised an eyebrow. I don't think I'm doing anything. You're not, she agreed. That's exactly it. He didn't respond right away. Claire continued, her tone steady but quieter now. Most people operate in this gray space, she said. They imply things, they test reactions, they leave room to adjust later. And you don't want that? I didn't say that, she replied. I said it's common. And I'm not common, David said. No, she said. You're not. The way she said it wasn't teasing this time. It was observational, precise. Another pause stretched between them, but neither moved to fill it immediately. Finally, David spoke again. What do you want? He asked. The question landed cleanly between them, mirroring her earlier one. Claire didn't deflect it. She didn't smile it away or redirect it. She just answered. I want ease, she said. Not effortlessness, but ease. I don't want to feel like I'm constantly adjusting to be understood. David nodded slightly. That makes sense. And I want presence, she added. Not just being there, but being engaged. Paying attention. He held her gaze. You think those things are separate from what I said? Claire shook her head slowly. No, she said. I think they're built on the same foundation. David didn't respond verbally, but the understanding was there. Clear. Uncomplicated. And for the first time since they'd started having these conversations, neither of them moved away from it. Claire let out a small breath, something easing in her posture. Well, she said lightly, though her voice carried something deeper beneath it. This was more productive than most meetings I've had this week. David gave the faintest hint of a smile. That's not a high bar. Still counts, she said. She turned back to her laptop, but the shift felt different this time. Not a retreat, not a pause. Just continuation. David reopened his own. The office noise filtered back in. Phones, keyboards, distant conversation. But it felt further away now. Background instead of center. And as he resumed his work, one thought surfaced. Not loud enough to interrupt, but present enough to notice. Clarity didn't complicate things. It revealed them. Chapter 7 Momentum. It didn't begin with a declaration. There was no moment where either of them decided something had changed. No line crossed with ceremony or announcement. If anything, the shift revealed itself in what neither of them questioned. By Thursday afternoon, Claire no longer asked if she could sit near David's desk. She simply did. By Friday, he had stopped treating their conversations as interruptions. It showed up in small ways first. Lunch? She asked, not looking up from her screen. David checked the time. 12:18. Yes, he said. 10 minutes. She nodded once. That works. There was no back and forth about location, no drawn-out discussion about preferences. They left the office together at 12:28, walked 2 blocks to a cafe that neither of them claimed as a favorite, and ordered without overthinking it. The entire process took less than 5 minutes. That was efficient, Claire said as they sat down with their trays. It usually is when people don't negotiate every step, David replied. She smiled faintly. You make everything sound like a system. It is a system. Even this? She asked, gesturing lightly between them. David didn't answer immediately. Instead, he picked up his fork, took a bite, and set it down again before meeting her gaze. This isn't a system, he said. Claire's eyebrow lifted slightly. That's new. It's still consistent, he added. That sounds like a system. It's not structured, he clarified. It's aligned. The word lingered. Claire leaned back slightly, studying him. Aligned, she repeated. You're choosing your words more carefully. I usually do. Not like this, she said. David considered that. You're more precise than most people, he admitted. Claire smiled. I'll take that. They fell into a comfortable silence for a minute, eating without the need to fill every second. Around them, the cafe buzzed with low conversation, clinking dishes, the kind of ambient noise that blurred into the background. Claire broke the silence first. You know, she said, this would have driven me crazy a few months ago. What would? This, she said again lightly, the lack of definition. David watched her for a moment. You prefer defined things. I do, she said. It makes everything easier to navigate. And now, she tilted her head slightly, considering. Now I think definitions come too early sometimes, she said. They force something into place before it's ready. David nodded once. That happens. And then people spend the rest of the time trying to maintain it, she added. Even when it stops fitting. That's inefficient. Claire laughed quietly. There it is again. It's accurate. I'm starting to think that's your version of reassurance, she said. It's not meant to reassure. It does, she replied. David paused slightly at that, then nodded once. Noted. She watched him with a small, knowing smile. You actually did note it. I usually do. Claire leaned forward slightly, resting her elbows lightly on the table. Then note this, she said. You're easier to be around than I expected. David raised an eyebrow. Based on what expectation? Based on how you explain things, she said. It sounds rigid. And it isn't? No, she said. It's just clear. That's the intent. I know, she said. But there's a difference between hearing it and experiencing it. David considered that for a moment. And the experience is different. Very, she said. How? Claire hesitated, not out of uncertainty, but because she was choosing how to phrase it. You don't pull, she said finally. David's brow furrowed slightly. Pull? Yeah, she explained. Most people pull for reactions. They adjust, push, test, wait for a response to confirm something. And I don't. No, she said. You just stay where you are. That seems more stable. It is, she said. But it also means, she paused briefly. Means what? He asked. It means if someone moves toward you, it's on purpose, she said. David held her gaze, the weight of that statement settling in. That's true, he said. Claire didn't look away. And if they don't? She asked quietly. Then they don't, David replied. The simplicity of it landed cleanly between them. Claire exhaled softly, sitting back again. That's rare, she said. It shouldn't be. But it is. They returned to their food, but something had shifted again, not in direction but in clarity. After lunch, they walked back together, the conversation lighter now, drifting into small observations and quiet humor. By the time they reached the office, the ease between them felt established, not tentative. Later that afternoon, Marcus leaned over the divider again, watching the two of them with thinly veiled curiosity. I'm not saying anything, he said. David didn't look up. Then don't. I'm just observing. That still involves saying something, David replied. Marcus grinned. Fine. I'll keep it to myself. He lasted 30 seconds. You two are different, he added quickly. David continued typing. That's not specific. It's intentional, Marcus said. I'm trying not to get shut down immediately. You're succeeding. Good, Marcus said. Because I had a theory. David sighed quietly. There it is. Marcus leaned in slightly. You didn't change anything after your breakup, did you? No. And somehow, that worked in your favor. David glanced up briefly. I didn't approach it as something to fix. Marcus nodded, like that confirmed something he already suspected. Yeah, he said. That tracks. David returned to his screen. Are you done? For now, Marcus said. But I'm watching. I don't think that's necessary. Oh, it absolutely is, Marcus replied. This is educational. David didn't respond. But across the aisle, Claire had heard enough to smile. That evening, as the office emptied out, Claire stood near David's desk, waiting without announcing it. He noticed her after a moment. You're still here, he said. So are you. I'm finishing something. I can wait. David glanced at the clock, then back at her. You don't have to. I know, she said. I'm choosing to. That landed more clearly than anything she'd said earlier. David nodded once. Give me 5 minutes. 5 minutes, she agreed. She didn't sit. She didn't check her phone. She just leaned lightly against the edge of a nearby desk, letting the quiet stretch without filling it. At exactly 5 minutes, David shut his laptop and stood. Done, he said. Good, Claire replied. They walked out together without needing to decide to. Outside, the evening air carried that soft transition between work and everything else, the kind of moment where people usually asked, what now? Claire didn't. Instead, she glanced at him and said, walk. David looked down the street, then back at her. Yes, he said. No hesitation. No qualification. Just alignment. And as they started down the sidewalk, side by side, the movement forward didn't feel like a decision. Felt like a continuation. Chapter 8, The Quiet Win, nothing about it felt dramatic. That was the first thing David noticed. There was no moment where everything shifted into something new, no clear dividing line between what had been forming and what now simply was. If someone had asked him when it happened, he wouldn't have been able to point to a single day, or a specific conversation, or even a decision. It had followed the same pattern as everything else that worked. It built steadily. It stayed consistent. It made sense. Saturday morning arrived without plans. That, in itself, wasn't unusual. David didn't feel the need to fill time just to avoid stillness. He woke at the same hour he always did, moved through his routine without deviation, and found himself standing in the kitchen with a cup of coffee, the quiet surrounding him in the same steady way it always had. Except it didn't feel exactly the same. Not because something was missing, because something had been added. He picked up his phone without urgency and paused for a moment, considering. Then he typed, David, I'm heading out for a walk. You're welcome to join if you want. He didn't overthink the wording. He didn't adjust it to sound casual or intentional or anything in between. It was simple, direct, and open. The reply came 2 minutes later. Claire, give me 10. David glanced at the message, then at the time. He nodded once. That worked. They met outside his building without needing to coordinate further. Claire approached with her usual easy stride, dressed simply for the weather, her expression relaxed but alert in the way it had become around him. Engaged, not performing. 10 minutes, she said, glancing at her watch. I'm consistent. You are, David replied. Noted, she said, echoing him from earlier in the week. He allowed the faintest trace of a smile, then turned, and they started walking. There was no immediate conversation. They moved side by side through the quiet streets, the early morning still settling into the day. The air was cool, the kind that didn't demand attention but made itself known. Claire broke the silence first, but not abruptly. This is nice, she said. Yes. That's it? She asked, amused. It is nice, David repeated. She laughed softly. You really don't expand unless it's necessary. I can, he said. I just don't always see the point. And yet, she said, glancing at him. You invited me. Yes. That suggests you saw a point. David considered that for a second as they reached the end of the block and turned. I did, he said. Claire watched him, waiting, not pushing, just present. It's more efficient to walk with someone I enjoy being around, he added. There was a brief pause. Then Claire smiled, slower this time, something softer beneath the humor. That might be the most practical compliment I've ever received, she said. It wasn't meant as a compliment. I know, she replied. That's why it works. They continued walking. A few blocks later, Claire spoke again. Can I tell you something without you analyzing it? She asked. You can tell me anything, David said. That sounds like a trap. It isn't. She glanced ahead, then back at him. I didn't expect this, she said. That's been a recurring theme, he replied. This specifically, she clarified. You. David tilted his head slightly. Explain. Claire let out a small breath, as if organizing the thought as she spoke it. I've met people who are clear, she said. And I've met people who are consistent, but it's usually rigid, like there's no room for adjustment. And that's not what this feels like, David said. No, she said. It feels steady, not limiting. David nodded once. That's the intent. I believe you, she said. Another pause followed, but it didn't need filling. Claire continued, quieter now. I also didn't expect to feel this comfortable without defining anything, she admitted. David glanced at her briefly. Do you need it defined? She shook her head. Not right now. Then we don't need to. That's relieving, she said. It shouldn't be, David replied. But it is, she said. Most people rush that part. I don't see a benefit in rushing something that's already working. She smiled again. You're very consistent about that. Yes. They walked in silence again, but it felt fuller now, not empty. After a few minutes, David spoke. I do want to say something, he said. Claire looked at him, attentive. Go ahead. He slowed his pace slightly, not stopping, but shifting enough that the moment felt intentional. I don't approach this casually, he said. Claire didn't interrupt. I don't move forward unless I see alignment, he continued. I don't maintain something that isn't consistent. I know, she said softly. And I don't adjust that based on comfort or convenience, he added. Claire's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes sharpened with understanding. You're not warning me, she said. No. You're explaining yourself. Yes. She nodded slowly. I appreciate that. David met her gaze fully. I'm consistent with what I said earlier, he said. Reciprocity matters. It does, Claire agreed. And I see that here, he said. The words landed plainly, without emphasis, without buildup. But they carried weight. Claire didn't respond immediately. Instead, she held his gaze for a moment longer than usual, then nodded. So do I, she said. That was it. No dramatic confession. No escalation beyond what already existed. Just acknowledgement. Later that morning, they stopped at a small cafe without planning to. This time, David ordered first, then stepped aside. Claire followed, paid for her own coffee without hesitation, and joined him at the table by the window. I didn't even think about it, she said, settling into the seat. About what? Paying separately. It's normal, David replied. It feels normal now, she corrected. He nodded slightly. That's alignment, he said. Claire smiled. There it is again. They sat for a while, talking about small things, work, observations, passing thoughts that didn't need structure or resolution. Felt easy, unforced. And when they eventually stood to leave, neither of them hesitated. That afternoon, David returned to his apartment, set his keys down in the same place, and paused briefly in the quiet. It was still there, the same quiet, but it didn't feel like something he existed within anymore. It felt like something he carried with him, unchanged, steady, intact. He moved through the space easily, without adjustment. Nothing about him had shifted. He hadn't compromised. He hadn't adapted himself into something unfamiliar. And yet, everything had still moved forward. Later that evening, his phone buzzed. Claire. Dinner this week? Not spontaneous. Planned. David looked at the message for a moment, the faintest hint of a smile forming. He typed back. David, Wednesday works. 7? Pause. Then, Claire. Perfect. David set his phone down. No second thoughts. No overanalysis. Just clarity. His father had said it simply once, years ago, in a tone that didn't invite debate. When they tell you they don't want you, believe them. At the time, it had sounded like advice about rejection. Now, David understood it more precisely. It wasn't about loss. It was about direction. Because when something didn't align, walking away wasn't failure. It was accuracy. And when something did align, you didn't have to chase it. You just had to recognize it. David picked up his book, settled into his chair, and let the quiet settle around him again. Unchanged. But no longer the only thing that stayed consistent. That, he realized, was the difference. Not everything needed to change. Just the right things. And sometimes that was more than enough.